Good afternoon. My name is Isabel Rohr. I'm the Deputy Director of the JDC Global Archives, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar on the Holocaust and Latin America. Before we start today's program, I'd like to say a few words about the JDC Archives for those of you who are not that familiar with us. The JDC Archives holds the records of the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, also known as JDC, or the Joint, which is the leading Jewish humanitarian organization in the world. Our collection includes 1 million documents, over 150,000 photographs, and an array of artifacts and historic films. Our collections are used by scholars from around the world, as well as family researchers, journalists, filmmakers, and others. We also offer fellowships to enable scholars to conduct research in our archives. I'm very pleased to welcome and thank our co-sponsor for this webinar, the Brandeis University Initiative on the Jews of the Americas, also known as JOTA, which is dedicated to deepening understanding of Latin American Jews and their distinctive experiences and contribution in the Americas. Designed as a hub for creativity and collaboration, it includes academic research, teaching, and cultural programs. I'm also delighted to welcome our 3 speakers today. The first one is Dr. Daniela Gleizer. Dr. Daniela Gleizer is a professor and researcher at the Institute of Historical Research at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. She holds a PhD in history from El Colegio de Mexico, and she has received several awards for her work. Her research focuses on the relationship between the Mexican state and foreigners, with an emphasis on immigration and naturalization policies. She teaches graduate and postgraduate history courses at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. She is a member of Mexico's National System of Researchers and also of the Latin American Jewish Studies Association. She's also an affiliate researcher at USC's Shoah Foundation Center for Advanced Genocide Research. Dr. Gleizer is the author of Unwelcome Exile, Mexico and the Jewish Refugees from Nazism, 1933-1945. I'm also very pleased to welcome our second speaker, Dr. Yael Siman. Dr. Siman earned her PhD in political science from the University of Chicago. She is a research professor in the Department of Social and Political Sciences at Ibero-Americana University in Mexico City. She is co-author of a book entitled Victim Activist in Mexico, Social and Political Mobilization Amid Extreme Violence and Disappearance. She's also co-author of an article, From Europe to Mexico, The Unexpected Journey of 30 Jewish Families Escaping Nazism, which was published in Holocaust and Genocide Studies in 2024. Dr. Siman is currently a Fulbright visiting professor at the Politics Department in Juniata College in Pennsylvania. Now, so delighted to welcome our third speaker, Dr. Emmanuel Kahan. Dr. Kahan holds a PhD in history and a master's in history and memory from the National University of La Plata in Argentina. He is a researcher at Argentina's National Council for Scientific and Technological Research and a professor in the Department of History at the Faculty of Humanities and Education Sciences, also at the National University of La Plata. In addition, Dr. Kahan serves as coordinator of the Center for Jewish Studies at the Institute for Economic and Social Development. He also directs the Diploma of Hate Speech at the Ana Frank Center in Argentina. Dr. Kahan published work spans Jewish life in Argentina, the reception of the Arab-Israeli conflict in the region, and Holocaust memory. Our three speakers today will present the book they recently co-edited, The Holocaust and Latin America, Migration, Resettlement, and Memory. Our format will be as follows. Dr. Gleizer, Dr. Siman, and Dr. Kahan will present the book for about 45 minutes. The book is organized around three key themes of the Holocaust and Latin America: migration, settlement, and memory, and each speaker will address one of these themes. After their presentation, we'll entertain questions for about 15 minutes. Please note that your microphones are muted, but that you can send us your question via the Q&A function on Zoom. You can send us questions at any time during the presentations or during the Q&A. Dr. Gleizer, Dr. Siman, and Dr. Kahan will now start the presentation. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Since I'm the first one to speak, it falls to me to express our thanks on behalf of the three co-editors of the book to the many people who have supported us along the way. First, I would like to thank most warmly Isabel Rohr from the Joint Distribution Committee and Dalia Bassner, Director of the Jews of the Americas program at the Cohen Center for Modern Jewish Studies, for their support and enthusiasm in organizing this event. We also want to extend our deep thanks to the USC Shoah Foundation, and especially to Wolf Gruner, Director of the Center for Advanced Genocide Research, for the impulse they gave this project by inviting a group of Latin American researchers to meet in Los Angeles 1 week in 2017 and another in 2019 to think together about a possible joint project. It is rare for us to receive this kind of wonderful invitation simply to come together and think. And this book is, in many ways, the result of that opportunity. We would also like to thank the editors of the series The Holocaust and Its Context, Susan Bradgett and Ben Barkow, as well as Emily Russell, who believed that this book was worth publishing. Finally, we would like to warmly thank the authors who are with us today and all of you for joining us. We decided to write this book in English because we felt it was important to make visible for an English-speaking audience the work being done in Latin America on the Holocaust, both in terms of history and of memory. We believe it makes an innovative and important contribution. By publishing the book in English, we hoped to build bridges between more classic Holocaust studies and the research that is now expanding the field toward Latin America, while also enabling comparisons with scholarship on Africa and Asia. When each of us first began working on topics related to Latin America and the Holocaust, for Yael and for me in Mexico and for Emmanuel in Argentina, there was still no real discussion about the globalization of the Holocaust, the globalization of Holocaust studies, or the decentering of Holocaust studies. We were working rather in a fragmented way on how different aspects of our national histories connected with the history of the Holocaust, and especially with the immigration policies adopted by Latin American countries in response to the Jewish refugee crisis. Without fully realizing it, we were both pushing the boundaries of Holocaust studies and contributing to our national histories from many different angles. Today, in 2025, the landscapes looks very, very different. For some years now, the expression globalization of the Holocaust has become increasingly common. But what do we actually mean when we speak about the globalization of the Holocaust? Of course, there is no single answer. Scholars have spoken of the intellectual globalization of the Holocaust, meaning that no global canon of world history can ignore it. Others refer to the globalization of Holocaust memory or to its worldwide resonance. And authors like Andrea Hussein has even asked whether we can speak of a globalization of Holocaust discourse. When we speak of a genuinely global approach to the Holocaust, we mean what other scholars have been calling for some time now, to widen the geographic and chronological frame and to pay attention to non-European actors involved both in the rescue of Jewish refugees and in the shaping of Holocaust memory. To quote Atina Grossman, we need to remap the landscape of rescue and relief in a truly transnational way, but also about the construction of memory. Although this process has been very slow, we can already see some changes in academic forums. In 2001, Northeastern University hosted the conference Third World Views of the Holocaust, which included papers on Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Since 2018, the German Historical Institute in Washington, D.C. has organized the conference series In Global Transit. Its first meeting was devoted to Jewish migrants from Hitler Europe in Asia, Africa, and beyond. The international conference series Lessons and Legacies has also begun to include papers on the Holocaust in non-European regions, particularly Latin America. All these examples point to a growing recognition of the global impact of the Holocaust and to the inclusion of perspectives beyond Europe. Within the Palgrave Macmillan series, The Holocaust and its Context, our volume is in fact the first book to approach the Holocaust from a region other than Europe, Israel, or the United States. Holocaust studies have also become more global by paying closer attention to the Jewish exile caused by Nazism, not only to perpetrators and victims in Europe, and by explaining it as a phenomenon that crossed the borders of European nation-states and even of Europe itself. The flight of Jewish refugees turned into a centrifugal movement that spread across 5 continents, creating connections between this primarily European event and places as distant as Shanghai in China, La Paz in Bolivia, or Nairobi in Kenya. As Isabel mentioned, the book is divided into 3 sections: migration, resettlement, and memory, each coordinated by one of us. We believe that another contribution of this volume is precisely to bring these 3 dimensions of migrants' experience into dialogue, since they are often studied separately. I will now briefly introduce the first part on migration and migration policies, which I coordinated. This is the area that has been most thoroughly researched so far. Even so, there are still countries about which we know very little, or for which we have not yet found authors who work on them. And I am not talking only about so-called peripheral countries, but also about very important ones, such as Peru, Venezuela, Ecuador, and most of the Central American countries. Not Mexico, that is part of North America. Research on the rescue of those who began to flee Nazism, work that owes a great deal to the pioneering studies of Haim Avni, has focused first and quite logically on understanding the stance taken by Latin American countries. It has tried to answer a basic question. If Latin America was often seen as a relatively underpopulated region, traditionally open to immigration and even eager to attract it, how did so many states close their doors, totally or partially, to Jewish refugees? How can we explain that each country responded to the refugee crisis from within its own national context and migration policies, and yet we still can see certain uniformity or at least clear parallels in the responses to Jewish rescue. We believe that the chapters in this volume help to articulate an answer, even though much still remains to be done. The first section of the book brings together 5 chapters that illustrate very different situations and a wide range of responses to the Jewish refugee crisis. Jeffrey Lesser's chapters show how thousands of Jewish refugees managed to enter Brazil between 1930 and 1945, despite restrictive immigration policies under President Getúlio Vargas. He challenges the image of Jews as passive victims by highlighting the agency of Brazilian Jewish leaders who reworked negative stereotypes and presented Jews as economical and political assets for the nation. Margalit Bejarano and Maritza Corrales analyzed Cuba as a temporary haven for over 12,000 Jewish refugees between 1933 and 1945, used mainly as a stepping stone to the United States. They highlight the ambiguity and constant shifts in Cuban immigration policy, shaped by post-revolutionary nationalism and labor protections laws. Ultimately, successful entry often depended less on official policy than on systematic corruption, as in many other Latin American countries, among immigration officials whose venality, despite scandals like the St. Louis, this famous ship, ended up saving a significant number of lives. Enrique Brams Garcia's chapter shows how Chile developed highly discriminatory, often secret immigration rules aimed specifically at Jews. From the Great Depression onward, the foreign ministry created a special juridical status that forced anyone suspected of Jewish racial origin to prove otherwise, using migration policy as a tool in domestic politics. Although some consuls defied these orders after a corruption scandal and fears about Chile's absorption capacity, the Popular Front government rigorously enforced a de facto ban on Jewish immigration. Sandra Gruner-Domig examines Bolivia's unusually open-door policy between 1938 and 1941, when the country admitted at least 20,000 Jewish refugees, numbers comparable to those admitted in Shanghai. This policy grew out of pragmatic goals of modernization and the desire of colonize sparsely populated territories after the Chaco War, wrapped in the language of nationalist military socialism. Yet it remained ambivalent and often hidden internationally, and many refugees enter via their own networks using temporary or tourist visas, which highlights the migrants' individual agency. This section closes with a chapter by Christian Schwick and Verena Muth, who compare the immigration policies of Trinidad and Colombia toward Austrian Holocaust refugees. Both places briefly allowed entry before imposing restrictions and bans in 1939. In Trinidad, a British colony, imperial security concerns led to the internment of many Jewish refugees as enemy aliens, while a Colombia's decree of 1938 targeted those who had lost their original nationality, implicitly Jews. In both countries, the war disrupted refugees' lives, costing them their livelihoods and, in some cases, leading to internment or deportations. Of course, these cases are not necessarily representative of the entire region, and the book does not pretend to be exhaustive. Some countries are absent in the book because their policies toward Jewish refugees have been already extensively studied, for example, Argentina and Mexico, while in other cases there is still almost no research at all, such as the cases of Paraguay, Venezuela, Uruguay, Ecuador, or Peru. This section highlights some recent developments in the field of refugee rescue. For example, some scholars have begun to examine the transnational rescue networks that made the mass exodus from Nazi-controlled Europe possible and played a vital role in saving many lives. They also emphasize that refugees were not simply passive victims, but active agents who use a wide range of strategies to gain entry into different countries. In addition, new work highlights the role of other actors, such as family members, consuls, local Jewish communities, and international Jewish and non-Jewish organizations in securing visas and support. I must say that all the Latin American region in general receive about 100,000 refugees, and in general. There is still much we don't know about migration policies toward Jewish refugees in Latin America, and many stories remain to be told. Our hope is that this volume will not be the last word, but rather an invitation to further research and conversation. With that, I will now hand things over to my colleague and friend, Yael Siman. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, the second part of the book, which I coordinated, focuses on the Jewish refugees and Holocaust survivors themselves, their arrival and settlement in Latin America and the Caribbean, and also their re-emigration from the region. This section is made up of 5 chapters that cover countries such as Mexico, Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay. Please, the next slide. In this 1943 map, you can see how Jewish refugees emigrated to almost every country in the region between 1933 and 1943. The numbers are not precise, but still we can see that this was a mass emigration to Latin America and the Caribbean. The next slide, please. The book's authors work in different institutions in the region, as well as in other countries such as Austria. The research is historical and also sociological, based on archival sources and with significant emphasis on oral history. Even when several authors work with testimonial sources, they follow different methodologies. Some incorporate testimony to complement what the archive indicates or to illustrate a particular situation. Others, based on testimony, explore the different meanings evoked by the refugees and survivors' memories. Thus, this section of the collective volume presents the experiences of refugees and survivors from their own subjectivities and the different ways they incorporate their past into their present. Likewise, through the study of memory, the emotions associated with the recollections constructed by the subjects of this history can be observed in the different chapters. In this way, this second part reveals, as scholar Lisa Malky notes, how the history of the Holocaust and its legacies in Latin America is built from below. In this regard, in her chapter on Mexico, and referring to the immediate post-war period, historian Daniela Gleizer mentions the case of Isaac Kellerstein, a Holocaust survivor who immigrated to the country in 1947. In his memoirs, Cuando el Sol se avergonzaba, When the Sun Was Ashamed, published in 1994, Isaac recounts that he began to read the list of survivors with, quote, terrible anxiety, unable to find in this first search the name of any of his relatives. Please, the next slide. In their chapter on Chile, Nancy Nichols and Alejandra Nutman analyze the journey that Jewish refugees undertook from Europe to this South American country. The authors refer to how refugee children are witnesses to their parents' experiences, recounting and interpreting them for us. Thus, Gunther Siman, who you can see on this slide, who had escaped from Germany, describes how his mother studied Spanish on the ship and taught the language to other refugees. For her part, please the next slide, Marion Mosny remembers that they traveled on an Italian ship full of Jews. She also recalls that her father, unlike Gunther's mother, did not study Spanish, but other subjects that would prove of little use upon their arrival in Chile. So he abandoned them and instead took to playing chess with other men. Despite the playful aspects of the voyage, Marion remembers the uncertainty and sadness felt by the adults. And I quote from her testimony, "What are we going to do there? How are we going to feed the children?" And having left the relatives behind in Europe, they were not at all a group of happy people. In addition to the testimonial weight of this second part, the book presents topics that had been less explored until now. One of them is how those who were children during the Holocaust experienced leaving home and separating from their families. Nancy and Alejandra examine this issue in relation to the journey to Chile, and my chapter on Mexico does as well. At least in the case I investigate, childhoods that experience violence, such as that of the Holocaust, have been little studied. And in the interviews conducted, we did not observe a methodology that took age differences into account. Please, Abra, can you change the slide? The stories that I analyze are those of Elena Sondovich, who you can see on this photograph. Please, the next slide. Noemi Nikin, who's holding hands with her biological parents who were assassinated during the Holocaust. And the next slide, please. And Peter Katz, who is in this photo with his adoptive parents. All of them were orphan children who immigrated to Mexico after the war. An additional theme that emerges in the chapters is that of families who were already living in different Latin American countries and did everything possible to bring their relatives over. However, as Ariel Raber shows in his chapter, these efforts did not occur in isolation from the actions taken by local Jewish communities and international organizations. In the case of Argentina, for example, the local Jewish community undertook relief activities in close coordination with both the Joint and Hayas. On the other hand, regarding how these families received the newcomers, in my chapter, I mentioned how silence prevailed for a long time regarding the misunderstandings and family conflicts that some of these refugees and survivors experienced in Mexico. Two additional themes appear in the second part of the book. One of them has to do with the economic aid and other types of assistance that were given to refugees and survivors upon their arrival in Latin America and the Caribbean. Assistance that was not free of tensions and conflicts, issues that both Daniela and Ariel address in their respective chapters. The second theme concerns Jewish life in small national collectives, such as that of Austrians in Uruguay, but also, for example, Austrians and Germans in Mexico, and re-emigration from the region, for example, from Montevideo to Vienna. The final chapter of this second section, written by Oliver Kuschelm and Pablo Rudich, shows how even in situations in which Jewish refugees felt safe in the host country, local circumstances, together with personal nostalgia for the national homeland, the Heimat, and family ethics functioned as driving forces for return. Moreover, based on a particular case, the chapter addresses broader migration-related issues connected to permanence, transit, and the reconfiguration of lives and belongings, not only of the refugees, but also their descendants, even many years after the chronological end of the war. The volume does not incorporate a comparative perspective. However, having one chapter next to another, each focused on a national case, makes it possible to identify certain similarities and differences. Daniela refers to this in particular when she notes that in Mexico there were no large-scale collaborative efforts between the local Jewish community and international organizations, as occurred in the Argentine case. Moreover, proposals for group rescue project did not come to fruition in Mexico as they did in Argentina, as illustrated by the case of the Jewish displaced persons from Forenwald, researched by Yael. Finally, I would like to mention that although many of the local and international archives had already been consulted in previous research, the reclassification of documents and collections in some of them, as well as the digitization of materials and the creation of new testimonial and memory sources, such as Voces de la Shoah Memoria Viva in Chile, offer new points of entry and make it possible to explore aspects that have received little attention until now. This second part, as well as the book as a whole, aims to contribute in this regard. I now give the floor to our co-editor, Dr. Emmanuel Kahan, to present the third and final part of the book.
Say that thanks Yael and Daniela, my colleagues, and almost JDC and Brandes for make this possible. It's a hard job, this work, this compilation of the book, and it's a great moment for share our research and what we do during this period of time. I'm going to present the third part of the book. It's about all the book are sensational in a way. They have really great approach. But in a way, the discussion about memory, it's a contemporary issue. During this research week in LA, in USA, we discussed a lot about how the memory of the Holocaust impact in our countries, in America Latina. And we discovered that in a way, in different national contexts, the memory, the Holocaust memory, have specific issues, but at the same time they have similar or collaborative aspects that they put in contact different realities, national realities in our way. As Cassia Dinner shows for the US or François V for La France, for France, sorry, in America Latina, the Holocaust memory has an early and changing impact during the 40s and the 50s. The discussions about the Nazism, the criminal politics about against the Jews and the anti-Semitism has a strong impact in the public space, and they move different publics, different organizations in the public sphere. So as Hasedino shows for the US again, we can discover that that the memory of the Holocaust has a private and a public uses during this long period. I mean, with private and public uses, the uses of the Holocaust in between the Jewish institutions in all these countries, but at the same time, a lot of organizations from human rights, anti-fascism movements in the 30s, 40s, 50s, that they shows they denounce the crimes of the Nazism as a kind of as a kind of interrupt in the public spheres in their own specific national environment. Yes, as Estel Tarica shows in her book about Guatemala, Estel Tarica is one of the authors of the book in this part of the of about memory, and now I think that she's looking this webinar. She built this conceptualization about Holocaust consciousness as a kind of of Holocaust memory as a view to to denounce the different kind of violence that America Latina has in her 20th century historical experience. But at the same time, in a way, as Daniela shows and Yael told the same, the Holocaust memory in the region, in these countries, has this this mix between the global and transnational, universal and local uses of the experience of the murder of the Jewish, of the European Jewish during the 40s in Europe. But as maybe you don't know, Latin America, it's a big region with different kind of countries with a large history, and in a way we have different kinds of violence during the 20th century. I mean, in the South Cone, Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Chile, maybe Uruguay and Peru, maybe Bolivia and Peru too, we have strong dictatorships. But in other countries are Colombia, maybe Guatemala, Central America, Mexico. Always the violence, the civil wars of the political violence has another kinds of meanings or impact during the 20th century. So the way in which the Holocaust memory dialogue with the national context is very different between each countries. No, our this not, it's not our, but this part of the book memory, it has again 5 chapters. One of them, the first one, is about the Holocaust afterlife and memory politics in Cold War Brazil, doing by Michael Rome. It's part of the postdoc of PhD dissertation in Yale University about the Jewish politics in Cold War in Latin America. It's interesting because, as I show with the mention of Hasia Dinner, uh, Michael shows that the discussion between the Holocaust memory in Brazil start or began in the early 50s. In a way, the confrontation between the Jewish community in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, and the German community about the character of the German politics German politics against the Jews made the public discussion about the characterization of Nazism in the public sphere in Brazil. But at the same time, when the wars became end, it was interesting what happened in between the Jewish community in relation with with the Holocaust memory between the Jewish community. As Michelle shows, the discussion about the uprising ghetto Warsaw commemorations during the 50s shows how some institution of the Jewish community use the Holocaust memory to support the solidarity campaigns from Israel, but in a way, the communist Jews in the same country use the Holocaust memory to denounce the totalitarianism regime in Brazil during that years. So it's interesting how the Holocaust memory began to be used to support Israel or to denounce or to fight against the dictatorship in Brazil. Um, for example, the chapter written by Lorena Cardona from Colombia, from Universidad de Manizales, Itineraries of an Exemplary Memory, Colombia and the Holocaust. It's very, very interesting because in a way, it's different because what happened in the South Cone in Brazil or Argentina or Uruguay, because the violence in Colombia has a large period of political violence. It's a civil war. It's a conflicto armado. And the discussion about the Holocaust introduced different meanings for analyze the violence used by the guerrillas, la FARC, the Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias de Colombia, or at the same time to denounce, the terrorism used by the army forces in Colombia during this period, this large period, the second part of 20th century. It's interesting because when the peace treatments began in the last 20 years, or began the discussion about the peace agreements in Colombia, the Holocaust memory introduced, the narrative to support the recognition of the victims of the conflicto armado in Colombia. And in a way, it's interesting to show to discover how the Holocaust memory became solidarity with the denouncement of different movements, human rights movement in this country. And in Colombia, it's very, very interesting because, as Lorena Cardona shows, we can discover an early testimonial literature on Holocaust survivors that put in relation the situation of the survivors that entry in in Colombia in the late 50s, but they be victims of the army conflict in the 80s in the same country. So this literature as Migajas de Pan of Ariel Bribrowicz, it's a great literature for know how the Holocaust experience introduced or illuminated or give some connections with the violence in this country. What happens in Chile, it's analysis by Valeria Navarro in her chapter about Holocaust memory and representations by Chilean Jews. And it's a very, very interesting chapter because they show, as Michael Rom, that in Chile we have early commemorations of the Holocaust during the 50s. But this kind of commemorations introduce, again, different kinds of commemorations, of representations about the Holocaust to support Israel or to denounce the dictatorship, but in a way introduce the comparison between the Holocaust and the Pinochet regime between 1973 and 1989. It's in an interesting chapter, but because they show how the discussion about the Holocaust memory and the Pinochet dictatorship introduced the debate about what was the attitude of the Jewish community during the military dictatorship in this country during these years. And it's interesting because the leftist Jews in the country denounce the support of the leadership of the Jewish community during the Pinochet regime, but at the same time, some institutions of the big ones, the central institutions of Chile, they reject this idea of the Pinochet regime as a regime characterizing by anti-Semitism during the dictatorship. So these different kinds of commemorations inside the Jewish organizations in Chile, it's very, very exemplary of the different uses in between the Jewish institutions in the region. Yeah. The Guatemalan chapter written by Estel Tarica, Holocaust Consciousness and Colonial Legacies in Guatemala. It's a great it's a great support to the book because in a way, as the Colombian text, they introduce what did happen with the Holocaust memory in context that the civil war and the genocide has a long history in a country, and how in this case the solidarity or the support as the U.S. institutions like the Shoah Foundation and the Guatemalan Forensic Anthropology Foundation give to different kind of organizations of victims of the genocide in Guatemala, in putting in connection the Holocaust memory between the recognition of the violence perpetrated in this country during the 80s. Estelle shows very well that the Shoah Foundation worked to recover the testimonies of the genocide in Guatemala, visibilize or put in relation the experience of the survivors of Holocaust in Guatemala. As Estel Tarica works, the Demetrio Coxil scholar activist in 1994 denounced for first times that what had happened in Guatemala was the Maya Holocaust, the Holocaust against the Maya population in the country, and materialized a representation between the genocide in Guatemala as a kind of a Holocaust in this country, in Guatemala too, in this Central America country. Finally, my chapter writing with Wanda Wechsler, a colleague from Universidad de San Andrés, San Andrew University in Argentina, the diverse uses of the Holocaust in public debates in Argentina, ran the second part of the 20th century in my country, the 20th century, yes, in my country, for to discover the early debates around the Nazism in the public sphere, a strong movement, a strong building of anti-Semitism, anti-fascism movement in the country, and how the institutions of the Jewish community, but at the same time, different kind of public organizations, political organizations, use the description or the fight against the Nazism and the anti-Semitism to introduce different kinds of meanings in the public sphere, to identify the Peronism as a kind of Nazism, as a kind of Criollo Nazism in the country, or to denounce the regimes, the dictatorial regimes that we have during the second part of the 20th century. So the Holocaust representation, the Holocaust memory has an deep, deep and early impact in the country during these days. But maybe the most strong moment of this development of the Holocaust memory in the country was the comparison between the Holocaust and military dictatorship has place in 1976 and 1983. When the Holocaust memory became solidarity with the fight developing by the human rights movement in the country. So during the 80s and the 90s, the Holocaust memory was, supported by different actors, not only Jewish institutions, different kind of movement, political parties, and we in the country we developed a lot of monuments and museums and different kind of initiatives that in the beginning of the 21st century became public policies on education and commemoration. So the Holocaust memory in the country was very strong in the public sphere, and in a way that is very interesting. Finally, for to close my presentation, it's interesting to remark that even each country has the particularly kind of introduction, the Holocaust memory in relation with the national context. We have similar ways to develop, a comparison studies for the future. So thanks, and now we can answer questions.
Thank you, Daniela, Yael, and Emmanuel. I think we've all learned a lot. And I will now, about the book and about the Holocaust and Latin America, I will now open the floor to questions. I see that we already have received a few. Please remember that your microphones are muted, and if you want to send us questions, you can do it via the Q&A function. I'm going to start with a few questions that came up, similar ones. Where can people purchase this fascinating book? So if you could,
I can answer that, Isabel. So it can be purchased even through Amazon, but it can be purchased directly from also Palgrave Macmillan, the publishing house. So there are, if you Google, you can find it. It's easy to purchase. Maybe it's easier for people to purchase the electronic version, because it is right now it's only a hardcover, but I believe next year will be soft cover.
Great. Okay, now two more specific questions. I'm going to try to see if there's any logical way. Okay, I'm going to ask this one. So someone asked if the book explores JDC's role with resettlement efforts in Latin America.
So I mean, yes, actually, the international organizations, right? The JDC, and if it explores that. Yeah, it does. I mentioned that in my presentation regarding the chapter on Argentina, written by Ariel Raber. So that one directly addresses that issue. As I said, there was close collaboration with several international agencies. However, there were also tensions, conflicts. So I invite you to read that chapter, but part one, Daniela can address that as well, because there was coordination regarding migration.
Okay, I can speak mostly about Mexico, and the joint was involved in exploring the possibility of an agricultural colonization project in 1939 it sends its representatives to Mexico to explore what were the real possibilities. And it was a very frustrating experience because they believed that the Mexican government was going to cooperate. And also there was an intermediary, how do you say, colonization company, that at the end it resulted to be a corruption scheme only to try to make money, and it was not serious. And also the government put a lot of obstacles to this colonization project, and in the end they realized that there was not a real possibility to make this project, to continue to this project, and they left Mexico very, very frustrated. But when the Mexican Jewish community funded political representation, a central Jewish committee, in 1938, at the end of that year, they became in contact with the Joint, and they collaborate. And the Joint has had a very important paper in helping putting some pressure on the government to try to open its door to Jewish refugees and then to the savement of survivors. So we do see the presence of the Joint very clearly, both before and after the war was over. But it was very difficult for them. It's also very interesting that they didn't understand the local ways of negotiation. So it was very hard. But then when the Central Committee appears, they could collaborate.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Daniela and Yael. We have a question specifically about Argentina. And the question is as follows: how did survivors in Argentina feel about Argentina's role in allowing high-ranking Nazis to settle there?
Well, thank you for the question. It's interesting point. In a way, it's a polemic issue here in the country. First of all, because this representation or idea as Argentina as a Nazi refugee, a country as Nazi refugees, it's not really true. We, as a lot of countries in Latin America, but in the US too, a lot of war criminals entered during the period. But at the same time, a lot of, as Daniela told, a lot of refugees first and next survivors after the war came into the country during the 40s and the 50s, a lot of them. And when I hear the testimonies in the Shoah Foundation or maybe in the Holocaust Museum in Buenos Aires, I discovered that they don't feel really bad about the situation in the country. I mean, in 1949, the Peronism government legalized the situation of that people that entry clandestine during this period. A lot of Jews was benefit by this kind of policies. So they entry and they stay here, as a different case of Bolivia or Mexico or Panama or other countries in the book, that they've moved to US or they leave the country to different places. They stay here in Argentina. So we don't have really a strong debate about the feelings of the survivors about what had happened in the country in relation with. Always the discussion about the Nazis in the period, that the relation between the Peronism and the Nazis, it's very strong. We have a really deep mythology about this subject. So in the book, the chapter about Argentina, written by Ariel Raber, mine chapter 2 shows that in a way this is not a Nazi country in the early 40s and 50s. Thanks.
Thank you, Emmanuel, and we have a similar question on that topic. Someone wants to know if there's any data on the number of Nazis that were admitted in the region.
In the region or in the country? Sorry.
Yeah, because it says, if you can give the complete question is at the same time that Latin American countries were restricting refugees, are there data on the numbers of Nazis freely admitted?
I don't know, Daniela, if we have a number of the Nazis that it will admitted. In Argentina, the case is very interesting because we have several commissions working in different periods of time during the 40s, the Comisión de Esclarecimiento de Actividades Anti-Argentinas, commission of research about anti-national, anti-Argentine activities that they persecute German people, but not in the way all that German people was Nazi. The papers of that research, you can find it in the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, at the archive at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Sorry, but in the 90s, in the late 90s, in the country, after the AMIA bombing in 1994, the government of leader by Carlos Saúl Menem, promoved the Comisión de Esclarecimiento de Actividades Nazis in Argentina, the SEANA, the Commission of Research of Nazis activities in my country. And this commission was very interesting because it was making bad important academic personalities from Argentina, from the US, from Europe, from Israel. And finally, they didn't show too much about the number of Nazis that became that entry to the country during the 40s. The number was very, very low. And in a way, in comparative, it was very, very low in relation with the number of Jewish refugees and survivors that enter in the same period of time.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Okay, so we have a few more questions. This one, Yael, is addressed to you. During the talk, Yael spoke about children Jewish migrants' experiences and how they shed light on both the experiences of the parents and of the children themselves. I was wondering if you found any testimonies from parents and children from the same family that speak on the migration and settlement in Latin America. And if you did, how did the parents and children speak differently or similarly about this experience?
Thank you, Isabel. Yes, I know Alexia sent that question. Thank you, Alexia, for listening, and thank you for your question. So yes, I have found not that many, because for the most part, you hear the children's testimonies, given that when they recorded these interviews, the adults were no longer alive. But for example, one of the families that I did find testimonies both for the mom and the two children, it's interesting to see how you hear the mom talking about how one of their concerns was to protect the children. And at the same time, you hear from the children how worried their parents were about them. So that is like a reciprocal feeling. So there is no contradiction there. However, I did find, and this is very interesting when it has to do with contacts, like whether political contacts, whether gray areas, such as maybe bribing someone, giving money in order to fix maybe a migratory status. Then the adult, I heard, I'm not saying names because it's sensitive information, but the adult might suggest that some corruption was involved, whereas the children might not have known about this or might have heard about it, but were not directly involved. So I'm thinking specifically, for example, about some Jews in Greece who were able to acquire the Spanish nationality, and then that became very important in either their escape or their capacity to leave Bergen-Belsen and flee. So anyway, so yeah, but one last thing, it's interesting that it's not only the age when these people experience the Holocaust, but also the age when these people are giving testimony. So then you also find interesting differences because children may not know many things about the past, but may have very vivid memories because they are younger. But the parents may know more about the past or certain things about the past, but they are older, so it is harder for them to remember. So that's also an interesting, I think, thing to consider when you're analyzing these testimonies and memoirs, even from members of the same family.
Thank you. So the next question is for, I think, Daniela, you're going to probably answer this. Is there any chapter that speaks about Cuba?
Yes, there is one chapter in section 1, written by Margalit Bejarano and Maritza Corrales, who sadly passed away while this book was in preparation. And they highlight the ambiguities and constant shifts in Cuban immigration policy between open and closing its doors. But they highlight the fact that ultimately the country could receive a lot of refugees because of the corruption, because paying in the entrance was one way of getting in, as in Mexico and in many other Latin American and non-Latin American countries in the time. So we invite you to read that chapter. It's very, very interesting.
Thank you. And I believe the next question is back to Emmanuel. Even though the books on both Argentina and Chile address comparison between the Holocaust and each of the military dictatorships of the 1970s, 1980s, is a comparison similarity with the Holocaust more salient for Argentina, since Argentina's dictatorship targeted Jews in a way that Chile did not? I don't know if you need me to repeat this.
Sorry, it's confused for me, the question.
So I think it's about the fact that both in Argentina and Chile there were comparison between the Holocaust and the military dictatorship, and the person wants to know if the comparison was, if even more people were making that comparison in Argentina than in Chile, because there was a military dictatorship in Argentina that targeted Jews, whereas this was not the case in Chile.
Now I understand. Yes, thank you, Isabel. Yes, in a way, the comparison was did in both countries, but in Argentina, the impact of the comparison was deepest because, in a way, the discussion about what is happening at that moment with the Jewish, not the Jewish community, but the Jewish people during the dictatorship was very strong. The dictatorship began in March 24, 1976, and in June of the same year, a commission of the U.S. Cámara de los Representantes, the U.S. Senator, start a commission about what had happened with the persecution of Jews in Argentina. So the discussion about the persecution of Jews, the anti-Semitism of the junta was very strong since the early moment. And different kind of testimonies that were very strong were very well known during that moment. Jacobo Timerman, journalist that denounced his own case in 1979, introduced in the international sphere the description of what would happen with him in the clandestine center of detention, and the questions about the Judaism and his identity and so more. So yes, the comparison what happened in the two countries, but in a way it was deepest the impact on the representation of the anti-Semitism in the junta militar in Argentina.
Thank you. And the next question is for you, Yael, again. It comes from our colleague, Diana Fumado, who works at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. She says that she's been working on Jewish immigration in the late 1930s, including South America, and that she finds that general statistics are very difficult to gather. She would like to know where the chart that you use with the numbers on the slides come from, like the source of that chart.
So yes, yes, it is. Thank you for the question. I don't know what colleague is it, but thank you. And so that chart is actually from 1943. I have to say that I came across it because another scholar has it in a website that specifically addresses the issue of Jewish refuge in Latin America, which is a wonderful website. So that's where I found it. And actually, I presented it once, and Alexia, who sent that question about the children, was very creative and found the original publication, which is an Argentinian publication from 1943. So these numbers are not as precise at all. So, for example, for Mexico, Daniela has researched this far more than myself, but the number oscillates between 1,850 and 2,200 between 1933 and 1945. And we both have been trying to research how many came after the war. So you see that number of 1,000 is not correct. But I think still that chart shows many important things. One is how difficult it is to, the first one, how difficult it is to have precise numbers for each country. But secondly, how massive the immigration was. And thirdly, some gaps, not only in terms of numbers for each country, but between countries. So that there you find some interesting gaps. So countries that were smaller would receive more refugees than countries that were bigger or had more capacity. But still, we do know better for some countries than others. And for others, we really simply don't know it. These are rough estimates. So I cannot, I mean, in order to have a systematic count, we would actually need to do much more work because I don't think we have enough. So yeah, some are very rough estimates, some are more precise, but still also some people moved from one place to another. Some people are counted at least twice, some re-emigrated. So anyways, I'm not sure I gave an answer, Isabel, but we're happy to continue this conversation.
The Q&A is going a bit over time, so I'm going to ask two questions. And then we'll close it, and then I will send the remaining questions to our speakers who can answer to you directly. One is, can you speak to the tensions between the refugees and the organized Jewish community in Buenos Aires? The person writes that their sense is that the refugees were more assimilated. Is that so?
I don't know, Daniela, if you want. I remember not in a way the research of Ariel Rubber shows the conflict between, I mean, this in Mexico is the same, I don't remember, but it shows this conflict between, the refugees that they came in Buenos Aires, or they came in Argentina, and they criticize the low attention that the Jewish institutions uh, took for them in at the moment. I remember a great work about writing by Leonardo Segman about the invisibilization of the Jewish survivors in by the Jewish community in Buenos Aires during the 50s. So it was. Leo Segman shows us. He said that it was in a way it was a rare situation, a rare conduct of the Jewish institutions, because they they build a strong support campaigns for help survivors, but at the same time they invisibilize them in Buenos Aires. No, they didn't recognition. They didn't invite into the institutions. They didn't make activities for them. So in a way, it was a strange situation between what it happens in a narrative, in a discourse perspective at the Jewish institution, and what did happen really with the survivors in the country. I think that something similar happens in Mexico. I remember these dialogues between Daniela and Yael about the 60s, the 70s, the 50s and the 60s in your countries.
Great. Someone asked if there is an article about the Dominican Republic in the book.
No, we didn't have an article about Dominican Republic. I remember the book of Tropical Zion about the immigration on Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, but we didn't have an article about Latin America. It's the biggest region with a lot of countries, and so we found a lot of researchers that are doing new things with new archives, but we didn't have.
So just to add that Marion Kaplan's book also is out there, and also we try to bring in some countries that were less visible, and still and marginal, maybe like many of our countries, but less visible.
Great, thank you so much. As I mentioned, we have a few more questions, but we're running out of time, so I will share them with you. I hope that you've all found our program interesting today. I want to thank again our speaker. I also want to thank again the Brandeis Initiative on the Jews of the Americas for co-sponsoring this program. Our next webinar will take place on January 7. Verena Buser, who is the recipient of the 2025 Bernard and Molly Stower JDC Archives Fellowship, will give a lecture entitled Perspective on JDC's Assistance for Hakshara in Nazi Germany. Invitations will be sent out next week. You can also register for it via the JDC Archives website, and we hope that many of you will be able to join us. Please sign up for our newsletter if you'd like to be added to our mailing list for upcoming public program. Thank you all, and take care.
Thank you very much.